My guest today is Jamal Moose, former asset manager turned entrepreneur who built and sold 2 e-commerce businesses, and one of them was for 7 figures. And now he's in the process of selling his third company. Personally, having already more details on the deal, I know it will be another 7-figure payday. So in today's conversation, I want to break down the mindset and mechanics of building a business with a end in mind, not just to operate, but to eventually exit. And I want this episode to be like a masterclass with the title of how to build a company that people will want to buy, from a gentleman who built and sold 2 and now selling his third one. So thanks a lot for coming to the Holdco Builders podcast, Jamal.
Thank you for having me. And I just want to correct you. I wasn't an asset manager, but I've worked in asset management for a number of different companies, but I was never an asset manager myself. I worked in the analytics
Great.
department, but what I'm most proud about in my past is my teaching background.
Okay, we will cover all that, but I want to start with, you've said that more than 50% of earnings come at exit. I find this to be interesting. Can you expand that with real examples you've experienced on your journey?
Yeah, sure. And that's something that I only realized after I sold my first business. and I've spoken to a number of different people who've sold their businesses over the years, and they all agree, and it's one of the maxims now in e-commerce, and I think generally across many businesses and industries. So what I mean by more than 50% of your earnings come at exit is when you're running your business, you have the operating profit that gives you monthly cash flow, and that's great. That allows you to pay yourself, pay your team, and also reinvest in the business. But when you exit your business, you don't simply have monthly cash flow. Now you have lifetime leverage. So let me give you an example. If you're making, say, $20,000 a month as profit in your business, over 2 years, that would be $480,000 in profit over 2 years, right? So that's $20,000 a month. In 1 year, that's 240. 2 years, $480,000 profit. But if you were to exit that business with an annual profit of, say, $240,000, that would give you 720. So once you exit, that amount that you take home as cash is more than 50% of what you would have earned while actually running the business. And it's very hard to kind of accumulate that kind of large sum just by taking your monthly earnings. But when you exit, you get that big, large, life-changing sum all in one shot. That gives you leverage, and that allows you to really just do things that you wouldn't have been able to do by simply operating your business. The way I see it is your business is your asset, the exit is your payday, not the monthly cash flow.
Personally speaking, I've talked to and I've met like almost half a dozen of traditional business owners, oftentimes people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They've built those businesses for 30 years. What you do pretty much is over the last 5 years, you've built and sold like almost 3 businesses. So what I've seen is that most of those old school entrepreneurs, they treat their businesses as their baby. So maybe the mindset part, like in your own journey, like how did you shift your mindset to see this asset to eventually exit and not to just hold it for a longer period of time?
That's a great question, and I'd love to tell you that I always had the mindset of building to sell, but that certainly wasn't the case. My first business, I had no intention of selling it because, as you said, it was my baby. I didn't want to let go of it. But I was very curious to see what the valuation would be for the business, so I spoke to a broker, and then one thing led to another, and very gradually, even when I was valued and I was vetted and I got some offers on the table, I still didn't want to sell the business. And so I can understand why many people don't want to entertain that idea, because I certainly was in that position. But what I realized now over the years is, I'll give you the example of my teaching background. My role as a teacher was to prepare my students to leave me, and same for my businesses. And I think just starting with that, where you know, hold on, these are the students in my classroom, I'm going to work with them, I'm going to educate them, but ultimately they're going to go off on their merry way. The exact same for any business I build. So it was a very gradual, organic process, but since that first exit, I've kind of now made the hard switch where, hold on, this business, I love it, I've nurtured it, I built it, but now it might be better off in someone else's hands. But that doesn't mean that you sell it to the highest bidder. And I think that's one distinction that needs to be made, because it's your baby. You wouldn't trust your child with just any random childminder, would you? And I think the exact same with your business. You have to be selective, because the last thing you want, Mick, is your business to just tank straight after you sell. Even though you might have your big payday and you're happy about it, but you don't want to see your business go down the drain. So I've turned down offers over the years from people that I didn't vibe well with, that I didn't trust, that would continue operating the business with the same kind of heart and expertise that I would want for my baby. So you can love the mission, but still exit the vehicle.
What would you say to someone listening who's maybe built their business for 5, 7, 10 years? They've maybe accomplished many of their dreams, but still they're like super emotionally attached to their business, and they really don't want to sell. So what would you tell to someone, or if this would be a conversation over a coffee?
Not everyone should feel compelled to sell their business. I have a friend who is a multi-8-figure e-commerce entrepreneur in the sports health niche, and he makes quite a large sum of profit per year. He's in the mid 8 figures, and he could sell his business for 20 to 30 or even $35 million in cash, which is great, but he doesn't want to sell. He thought about it, he explored the idea, he wrestled with it, but he said, Jamal, I've got a cash cow and it prints money for me every single year, and he doesn't want to let go of it, and that's totally fine. So you shouldn't feel compelled to sell your business, but what I would say is that in your entrepreneurial journey, it would be a little sad, maybe, not to experience at least one exit. Because I think as part of the entrepreneur's hero's journey, it's quite wholesome in a nostalgic kind of way to see something from idea in your head all the way to exit. And I think the exit is the last chapter in the story. So I think if you are building businesses and you're scaling them, I think to experience at least one exit and finish all of the chapters of the journey would be a nice experience.
So now I want to cover the being a math teacher part and going from there, because it's very rare that people like we all have one life, and what people oftentimes do is they just do this one thing for 30, 40 years and that's all. But there are a few entrepreneurs. One is, for example, Gianluca Vacci. He's now the famous DJ, but he used to be like running I think it's $1 billion business where they manufacture different machinery in Italy. And then he saw a documentary about a guy named Bernard Tapie, who's a French businessman, politician, and occasional actor, singer, and a TV host. And there was a Netflix series on him. And one time he was even an owner of Adidas. And what those people did pretty much is, during this one life, they had very different careers. I mean, one is businessman, then turned into DJ. Another one was a politician, turned into entrepreneur, who later became an actor. So in your case, there is a math teacher, then you worked in an asset management firm, and now you pretty much start, build, and sell e-commerce businesses, and who knows what you're doing in 5 or 10 years. So could you cover this part of your journey and why it has been like this, and maybe on different times on your life, why have you made this drastic change, if we can say that?
Yeah, and you're right in that people do spend maybe 30, 40 years only in one lane, and you sometimes feel that you have to continue on in the lane that you started off in, because I had to reinvent my identity multiple times. And so there are a few things I had to deal with whenever I did that. And one of the things that you have to fight in your head is is not only the way you see yourself, but also the way other people see you, because sometimes we feel boxed in not only by our own self-image or self-identity, but the identity that we think others think about us, and that keeps you stuck. So in terms of my actual journey, I'd love to tell you I had this all mapped out. Absolutely not. That wasn't the case. Things just happened. So I was in asset management. I did internships at Lehman Brothers before they collapsed, Deutsche, BlackRock, and I thought that was going to be my career. I studied mathematics with economics at one of the top universities in London, and I thought that was my path. And then one thing led to another, and then I realized, at a very young age actually, I realized that I didn't want to be doing what I saw my older colleagues doing, who were coming into the office at 5, 6 in the morning, and they'd be going home at 8 or 9 p.m. And even though the pay was amazing and I was earning more than my parents at the age of 22, I had, I think, the foresight to think and pause and think, hold on, do I really want to be doing this? Because the work environment incentivized you to work hard. I remember at BlackRock, if you stayed past 7 p.m., they would give you a £15 dinner voucher. If you stayed past 10 p.m., they would you were entitled to a chauffeur, a BMW or a Merc, that would take you home from the office to your home. So there were these incentives that people were taking to spend more time at the office. And even though I didn't have a family at the time, that just didn't make sense to me. So I made a drastic shift to teaching. Why? Because there was an opportunity at the time to teach English, even though I had no English teaching experience, but to teach English in Saudi Arabia. So I left that position at BlackRock and I went to Saudi Arabia. And I taught English for 2 years, which was a very rich experience. And then I came back to the UK, and then I was able to leverage my maths background, and I trained to be a high school maths teacher. And then I taught maths for 6 years in schools all around London, and then also at a British school in Qatar. And it was in Qatar when I was working where where the hours of work there were amazing. I would start school at 7 a.m. and I'd be home by 2 p.m. So the entire day kind of just opened up for me. So I'm like, you know what, I've got all this time, and I'm never one to kind of be comfortable. So I'm always trying to find ways to do things. And when I was working as a teacher, I was always trying to find ways to be the best possible teacher. And even though I was one of the youngest teachers in my department, I was continually rated as the most outstanding. And that's the phrase they use in teaching. Outstanding meaning that's the highest category of teaching, because every single day I'd come home, I'd study my tape. I would actually record myself teaching, and then I would study it and see what I did well, how the students reacted. I would plan my lessons, I'd buy books. I really threw myself into teaching, and I loved it. And then something happened at school, which was a very negative experience at the time, but it was, in hindsight, a great experience, where there was an opportunity to be the head of a department. The lady who was in that role at the time, she was going on maternity leave. And so they said, right, we're looking for someone to fill that role. And I wanted it because I thought, this is something that I'm going to throw myself into, and I know how to really engage my team and my students. And then I applied, and the school went against their own policy of not giving all internal candidates an interview because I was too young. They didn't even want to indulge me. But their policy said, if you're an internal candidate, you're at least guaranteed an interview. And I thought, you know what, just give me some face time. I'm going to show you what I've got. I wasn't even given that opportunity. So it was a big kick in the teeth for me. But as I said, in hindsight, that was one of the straws on my back that said, Jamal, you know what? You can't keep on letting other people dictate your destiny and what you can or can't do. And that's when I threw myself into the online world. I tried a bunch of things, but the thing that I ultimately settled on was e-commerce. And because of the working hours I had, I was able to work on this in the evenings and on the weekends. And I did that for about 2 years while keeping my full-time job. And then after 2 years, even though I was able to launch my brand within about 3 to 4 months, my business was big enough within 2 years to allow me to leave my job. And since 2018, I've been doing this full time.
This is awesome. You covered one very interesting thing. I've done almost 100 of those Holdco Builders episodes, and not too many people have said that they've reinvented their identity. And this is something I've been reading a lot. This is something I've been doing before I did all that, because who you are talking to at the moment, it's not Mick 1.0, like who I was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't know much about the subject. All this thing, it was too much for me, but I changed my identity so I could be able to do all that. It's a very interesting subject, so maybe you can cover how is this and how has been this process for you as you've been doing it for few times. I'm asking because it's most people don't understand this, but those who do, I can always talk like hours and hours, because it's so exciting, because they now, once you know how it works, you can do it again and again and again, and I think the sky is the limit if you do that.
100%, and it is something I find truly exciting, because I'm in the process now of reinventing my identity again. So, and it's very hard to kind of see the actual evolution while you're going through the process. It's very easy to talk about it in retrospect, but now I'm going through another evolution that probably started about 2 years ago, and that is me becoming more public. Because in the last 9 years, I've been in the e-commerce space now 9 years, close to a decade. But the first maybe 6 or 7 years, I was working in complete private. No one knew who I was. I didn't want people to know who I was. I did everything in complete isolation. I had a team that was largely remote in the Philippines and in Eastern Europe, and I loved it. But now in the last 2 years, I'm sharing a bit more about my story. I'm giving speeches in conferences, and I'm sharing more content online. And it was truly frightening. It was the most frightening thing I've ever done. I've done skydiving, all of that. This was more frightening because, as I said earlier on, we care a lot about what other people think. And I've got people who know me as the Jamal from university, or the Jamal as a teacher, or the Jamal from high school. And their opinion of me used to weigh quite heavily on my shoulders, because if I start talking about e-commerce or selling a business, in my mind, I'm thinking, they might think, who's this guy? Why is Jamal talking about that? So all of those things would play on my mind. And then I was listening to a podcast, something Miller, I forgot his name, but his surname is Miller. And he was talking about this very same topic. And he gave a great analogy, which I found to be really true. He said, when you're driving down the motorway and you're stuck in your lane, you have all the cars in their own lane, and you want to switch lanes, and there's all this jam traffic. When you switch lanes, the cars in that lane might start beeping and honking at you for the first few seconds. And then afterwards, they stop. And now you're in your new lane. And the noise stops. And I thought, you know what? It's true. So you have to be aware that you are going to have these feelings. And I used to feel guilty for even feeling this. But now I know that, hey, you know what? As part of the journey of evolution, of growing into a bigger and better version of yourself, you have to anticipate there'll be a period of maybe a few days, a few weeks, a few months where you'll feel that you don't belong. And that's totally fine. But if you anticipate, that period becomes shorter and shorter and shorter, to the point where ultimately maybe in my next evolution, I won't feel that at all, or it'll only be for a split second. Who knows?
So now the evolution into becoming an entrepreneur who builds a business from scratch in order to sell it in 2, 3, or in 4 years. Not too many people are not doing that in that systematically. So trying to understand maybe some of the mental models or your personal evolution behind this. And you've shared few things. I was doing a research that where you reference to Build to Sell, a book, and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And maybe what did you learn from those books, and how did you act on it?
Yeah, the 7 Habits, that was the first self-help book I ever read. And it was the book that led me down the path of self-development. And I'm so grateful for that book. I've read that book. I bought the teenage version of that book for my son, who's now 12. I've bought the family version. I've really threw myself into the world of the 7 Habits. And one of the biggest learnings from that book is that there are 2 ways to work on yourself. And there is the personality traits, which I think in this day and age especially, people, all they talk about is the surface level improvements, positive thinking or being charismatic or speaking well and all these other things. And these have their place, don't get me wrong. They're very important. But what we have neglected is those timeless universal values that truly build someone's character. And it's not fun to talk about this, it's not sexy, but I think it's a lot more important. And I've met people over the years, as you have done, I'm sure, who are not very charismatic, who might not be very fun to talk to, but they are solid people. They have true values, a value system that is very much aligned with what is universally deemed to be correct. And I much rather spend time with these people than someone who's a lot more fun, but their value system isn't aligned with me. That book really just made these values clear to me, and it kind of made me less mesmerized with all of the personality narrative that we see in this day and age. And Build to Sell, it was all, I think that solidified my idea of building to sell, because I only read that book after I sold my first business. So it gave me that long-term mindset, begin with the end in mind, which is one of the 7 habits in the book by Stephen Covey.
So have you shared this 3-year exit blueprint? This is, if we can say, like your actionable roadmap to selling your company or making it sellable. Could you maybe walk us through your 3-year plan?
Yeah, sure. And you can truly start, launch, scale, and exit a business within 3 years. I think it's more than feasible. So the first year is all about setting the right foundation, where you find a product or you find a customer to serve, and you create a product to serve this customer. So you start with one product, one channel, and all you're focusing on in the first year is you're not worrying about profit, you're not worrying about anything else. All you're focusing on is product market fit, offer testing, and perfecting and crafting your brand story. That's all you're doing. You don't rush scaling, you set the roots for a brand. And you can do this in about 6 to 12 months. That's the first year. Now, in the second year is when you start to scale. So you can now launch bundles and variations of your existing product, launch new products to serve the same customer avatar. You add new marketing channels, you start building a team, and you can get to, I would say, 6 figures in monthly profit by at some point in year 2, just by doing this in a very disciplined and predictable way, where you keep on launching more products, you keep on adding new channels, and you keep on incentivizing the customers that you've acquired in your first year or 2. And then in your final year, this is the year that you prepare to exit. And as I'm sure you know, when you're looking to sell your business, one of the key things that a buyer looks for is profitability. They look at your trailing 12 months profit. They want to make sure that the business can run without the founder, that it's not dependent on you. And so what you want to ensure is you have a solid team, you have the operational SOPs, you don't launch new products, because usually when you're launching new products, this eats into your margins as you're launching them. So you really want to maximize your profit margins, your profit margin in the last year. You want to cut all the fat, any unnecessary expenses, just start the business, run the business in such a way where if someone were to take over the very next day, they could continue running it and it would be a very seamless, smooth transition. And you start to speak to buyers, I would say 6 to 9 months before you even are looking to sell. You want to get your name out there, you want to start talking to people, you want to start having those early conversations. So the process to exit is not a transaction that happens in one shot. It's more of a transition, and you have to anticipate the entire process to take some time.
You've followed this roadmap yourself, and you've saw others, your friends, your clients following this roadmap. But still, I'm sure it's not always going this way, as things may change. So what do people do or maybe get wrong in each of these 3-year slots or levels, or if we can say, what have you seen is the most common things?
Yeah, there are so many ways you can mess this up. I think one of the things that people get wrong with e-commerce in general is they don't have a customer demographic in mind. They are launching random products to random people and they spread themselves too thin. They aren't known for any particular kind of product or niche. And as the saying goes, the riches are in the niches. So it's a lot better to go deep into one particular niche. And that's one mistake I've seen. One very common mistake is their books are a mess, right? They don't have their numbers buttoned up. And when a buyer looks at your numbers, that's one of the easiest deal killers where they just can't make sense of what's going on.
Okay, so now when it comes to revenue and profit, obviously you brought out the importance of profit and the importance of profit over the past 12 months. If I can ask, why do people still celebrate top-line numbers?
Because it's fun. Because you can share your numbers on Instagram and LinkedIn and people will praise you for it. And it's a very quick dopamine hit, right? And I think you and I as business owners, we know that revenue means nothing, right? Because I know of businesses making significant amounts of revenue, but they don't have any profit, right? And then I know businesses making much smaller revenue, but they have a very, very fat profit margin. I think it's quite naive for people to see revenue as the end goal. It's not. It's only, as I said, a stroke of the ego. But people in the trenches in business know that, hey, you know what? Revenue is only one signal, but the true signal is what's left in your pocket when the month closes.
Now, when it comes to preparing for the exit, what are the maybe, when we're talking about the buyers you have met, what are the typical questions you receive on the first question, on the first meeting, on the first email, and how is selling your business today is maybe different when we take the first 2 businesses you sold? Like how do you prepare yourself so you don't spend too much time and you have all the answers ready for the buyer, potential buyers?
Yeah, so one of the key things obviously is, as I mentioned earlier, is clean books, right? So what they want to see is profitability with clean books. I think that is one of the key things. So they want to know the size of the business and what kind of profit it makes, and see that the business is indeed growing. So they might ask you, okay, so this is the profit, for in the last 12 months, but what was the profit the 12 months prior to that? What they want to see is that there's a positive trajectory, because no one wants to buy a business that's on the decline. They want to see something on the ascendancy that they can benefit from. So that's really, really key. The second thing would be owner independence, and that's really important, because if the owner is the business and the business can't run without you, then it becomes very difficult to sell that business. So you need to ensure that there's a team in place, and thanks to what's available today, you can have a very, very lean team. I have a team of a very large team across my different businesses, but my actual salary payroll isn't as big as you might think because I'm able to leverage great talent in Eastern Europe and the Philippines, and they are able to do what's necessary to keep on growing the business thanks to the systems and SOPs that we've built. And the last thing that they look for, and I actually got an inquiry, I think it was Monday or yesterday, and someone was interested in my business, and because he said they only buy businesses that are defensible in the long term, where that are not threatened by new inventions. And my current business is certainly that. You can have the latest advancements in AI and you can revolutionize the world, but what we sell will never go away. So I think this is more of an icing on the cake. It's not something that needs to be there, but what they do want to see is ideally some level of defensibility and predictability.
As this is a Hold Go Builders podcast, people running, buying, selling multiple companies, what is your take on this? Building one business or running and managing multiple companies? What is your take on this?
Yeah, it depends. I don't have much experience in this. I do have two businesses. I have my e-commerce brands, and I also have an e-commerce coaching company where we mentor e-commerce entrepreneurs. So even though it's two companies, I feel like it's one because they are very much in the same vertical. And I'm able to transfer many of the things that we do in our brands and teach it to our students and so on and so forth. I've never run multiple businesses. I know people who have a car wash business and this business and that business, and I don't know how they do it. I think if you have the right executive team in place, I'm sure you can manage it. But I've stayed very much within what I know. I've been excited by shiny objects in my earlier years, but now I think as we were talking before we went online, I've learnt to put the blinkers on and stay in my zone and go deep and go hard.
Now, again, back to the exit part, selling the business, finding and engaging with buyers. What is maybe something many people overlook about deal making, about selling the business, and when and if we can say how should founders start talking to brokers and the buyers?
Yeah. They should start 6 to 9 months, even 12 months before they are looking to exit. This is a process, and sometimes you might think you're ready to exit, but you're not. A good broker will advise you. There are services out there that will get you exit ready, that will work with you, clean up your books, improve your operating margins and so forth, so that you can get the maximum possible valuation. I think one thing that people are not ready for, which I wasn't ready for or I wasn't aware of, is sometimes you might get an offer and it sounds really good on paper, but the terms of the offer are rubbish. There might be some protracted earn-out clause or some stability payments that get activated if you hit certain metrics. So you have to be ready for this. And there's a saying in the M&A space where you either dictate the price or you dictate the terms, not both. And I've seen that. And I think one of the best things that someone can do, and this is really, really important, is be willing to walk away. Don't sell, go to market when things are going well for you, not when things are looking bad, or maybe you might be going through a terrible quarter and you think, you know what, I'm done with this, I want to walk away from it. That's the worst time to sell. Start thinking about it when things are going good. That puts you in a position of power, and if you get an offer or you get terms that you don't like, then you can very politely say, no, it's not for me. But if you're a bit desperate, I think buyers can smell that, and it puts you in a weaker position overall.
Would you add anything if I would add, like, what separates a ready-to-sell founder from a hope-to-sell founder?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I think when you say ready to sell, what comes to mind is a seller or a founder who knows their numbers inside and out, who knows their brand, who knows the value and the worth of what they built. And going back to what I said earlier, that they don't just want to sell the business to any random bidder, someone who might have very deep pockets, but when they have a conversation with them, they just don't get a very good vibe. And I think a ready to sell founder is someone who is selective about who they are willing to sell to. A hope to sell founder would just want to wash his hands off their business and sell to anyone who's willing to take it.
Jamal, what has to be true for you not to sell your business?
What has to be true to not sell it?
For you, yes.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, how long, like you said, willing to walk away. You're always willing to walk away. Like, is it the price? Is it maybe you're seeing there is a trend coming up, orders are going up, like you like making this decision that, okay, I'm not going to sell the business, and it's fine if I'm going to run this for another 3-4 years. Is there anything?
Yeah, and I think that is true right now, where if my current brand, if I don't sell it, it doesn't bother me. I've got the systems in place, I've got leverage, and I know that with each passing month, the valuation would only keep on getting higher and higher and higher. So if I don't sell it this year, or I sell it in 2 years' time, I know that overall I'll be better off. That doesn't bother me too much. But in terms of what I think you might be asking about when I'm speaking to a buyer or a potential buyer. Yeah, so when I'm speaking to a buyer, it's good that we were talking about the 7 habits and the character values and the personality traits. I need to be comfortable with who they are and what they stand for. What I don't like is when I speak to a buyer or a potential buyer who just wants to flip the business straight away. They want to buy it, and then within a very, very short time frame, they just want to they want to capitalize on a very quick multiple themselves. That doesn't sit well with me. I want to see the business grow. I want to see someone who will buy it, and usually I'm deeply involved for a certain period after I exit anyway, because that's usually one of the clauses APA, where I train and I consult for a while. I want to see them doing extremely well, so that every time I look at the brand online, I see it doing things that I didn't get to yet. And that really fills my heart. And that was the case with my first business, actually. I sold it, and then it did really well for about 2 years. For about 2 years after I sold it, I was involved for about 3 months very deeply after I sold, just training the team that was taken over. And then they themselves sold that business after 2 years, and then it tanked. And all the things that was working for the business, they changed it. I'm not sure what they were doing, but clearly they didn't have the operational excellence and expertise to maintain the business at the very least. But in their case, it just tanked, and that was very sad to see.
Now, when it comes to some of the challenges you've faced and maybe facing, the process you shared, the 3-year process, like how much do you think it's still like repeatable, and how much there is involvement of maybe market timing, luck? What is your view on that?
There's always an element of market timing and luck, but I don't think you should account for that when you're going through this process, because that's out of your control. As you know, they talk about in the 7 Habits, there's a circle of concern and there's a circle of influence, and you focus on I think that's how it goes. But you focus on what you can control. The other stuff is out of your hands. So the market timing, all of that, you can't control. When I sold my first business in 2019, there weren't that many buyers. It wasn't really a big thing. There were only a few buyers in the space. And then in the years following COVID, there was a whole flood of buyers. Money was cheap, liquidity was everywhere. Everyone and their mother became a buyer of businesses because they had such cheap access to capital. And now in the last 2 or 3 years, the capital isn't as good or as easy to get by. And we've seen many of these businesses that popped up during the pandemic now go bankrupt. Timing is kind of important in that sense, because the multiples we were seeing then during the pandemic were outrageously high. Now things have kind of come back to normal. So if you did want to operate using this framework, you do it. And I think, you do it independent of what's going on in the markets. In your final year, as you are looking to exit, that's when you might start paying closer attention to what's going on in terms of the buyer appetite and the market climate and landscape, because you want to time it well. And right now, things are looking slightly better. Maybe in the next year or two, there might be a recession, who knows, and people might start taking on less risk and holding more onto cash rather than investing and So there are things that you might want to be aware of, and you might want to speed things up or slow things down depending on how things are going in your last maybe year to 18 months.
Jamal, it's been a great conversation. I want to wrap up with 2 fire questions. What is your, number 1, what is your favorite book? And number 2, what is the best investment advice you've ever received?
My favorite book, I would be remiss to not say that my favorite book is the Quran. I read it every day. It really grounds me, and it allows me to start my day on the right foot. My second favorite book, I've got loads, but one book that I'm reading now for the second time is by Ryan Holiday, Ego is the Enemy. I've read that book before. It's good to kind of refresh my mind. It's a great book. The best investment advice is don't try and time the markets. I made this mistake multiple times with different investments in stocks and crypto, where you try and time the bottom and you try and time the tops. I think is don't try and time the markets. Don't try and beat the markets. Think of yourself as a very average person. Don't think you're smarter than anyone, and just play the very, very long game, and don't with the view of not looking to sell. Obviously, you will probably sell at one point, but if you think, I don't need this cash, I'm not planning on selling, that kind of mindset really serves you to keep you grounded through all of the ups and downs and volatility.
Okay. Thanks again, Jamal, and I hope to talk to you again soon to see how is the acquisition going with the company number 3 and the other businesses you're building. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Mick.